Good morning, everyone. This is a meeting of the Commission on Legislative, Judicial, and Executive Compensation. It's Monday, February 22nd, 2016 at 11 a.m. I'd like to thank all the commissioners for being present for our introductory meeting to the second phase of our activities to look at legislative and executive compensation, having completed our first phase, I must say, on time. And I thank all the commissioners for their interest and great work. This is a meeting to determine what and how we are going to accomplish our second phase. The interesting thing is I'm presiding, Sheila Birnbaum, and I have no vote on this, so I am just a presider.
And thank you for continuing in that capacity.
Thank you very much. So I think I'd like to start out by asking the commissioners if they have any thoughts that they want to talk about or up front about the Commission's second phase of its work, and then we'll talk about possible hearing dates and when and where data and research that the Commission would like to see in order to assist it in doing its work and coming to a conclusion. So why don't we start at one end, the other, if any of the commissioners want to make any statement or make any comments?
Oh, well, I have some comments to make, only because I really don't know what our basis is to go ahead, and we're going to probably, I think, need some research, specifically with respect to the executive compensation and department heads, et cetera. I think you should distribute to each member of the commission the full statutory list of department heads that we're talking about and their current salaries, based in mind that these salaries are now, by January 1st, 2017, 18 years old. The last raise was enacted on December 18th, 1999 by the legislature, in 1998, effective January 1st, 1999, so it'll be 18 years since they've had a raise. Now, in addition to those statutory department heads, I think we should also get the list of their senior staff people, deputy commissioners, counsels, etc., because in the way of all things, once these poor people who haven't had raises for 18 years finally get a raise, and obviously it's not going to be a 3% raise, their deputies for all these years, some of whom I assume have gotten raises, and I don't know what their salaries are certainly going to be looking to fill the gap between whatever their salaries are and the new department head salary. Now, we don't set those, but we in effect are doing that. We in effect will be setting the governor's salary, although constitutionally we don't do that, because by raising the salary of the Attorney General and the Comptroller, one assumes, at least in my 24 years of legislative experience, it's always happened, that the legislature, by joint resolution, which is what it has to do under the Constitution, will raise the salary of the governor and the lieutenant governor. So we have to be able to consider that as well. And our enabling legislation also says we're supposed to look not only at things like inflation, but in areas like academia, for competing salaries. And I was somewhat surprised to see Roman, an old colleague of yours, Bob Megna, who was, I think, an akin deputy in Ways and Means, as you are all these years, and a very, very capable guy, nothing withstanding that, who, of course, became the governor's budget director, has now taken a position with a fancier title, Senior Vice President for Finance, in effect budget director of one of the constituent state universities, happens to be the one from my old Senate district, Stony Brook, in which his salary is $400,000 a year. Now, that's,
Good for him.
I think that's great. And by the way, he's not only very smart, he's now brilliant. And it's within the pension system. But, that's over twice what the governor of the state of New York currently makes. The new Senate Majority Leader, that's his, since he's my successor, that's his district as well in Stony Brook. And the Speaker, that's his alma mater. That's more, and they're now full-time in their jobs. That's more than 300% of what they make. So somebody's missing something. I have nothing against very large salaries in the SUNY system for SUNY professionals. By that I mean, deans of medical schools, provosts, named professors with, publications up the yin-yang. But this is an administrative job in the SUNY system, which several people at this table, not necessarily me, I'm way out of it, but certainly Roman are certainly qualified to do at a huge salary. So I think we should inquire of SUNY of senior administrative type salaries, what they are in the SUNY system, as something else for us to look at as we ponder these other types of increases. Next, looking at the legislative salaries, you could just do a simple inflation, or we can look at other things as well. First of all, there's a legislative session going on. As I read in the newspapers, the governor is calling for a limitation on outside income. Whether or not that'll happen or not, none of us know. And the session will go through for June. I assume he'll first try to do it as part of a budget package by April 1st, and if that is not successful and something that emanates towards the end of the session, that should give some consideration to us as we consider legislative salaries. Then we should also get the information that New York City developed for that rather gigantic salary increase that the New York City Council just got. Of course, we have no power to override the Constitution. The legislature under the Constitution is a part-time job. But who knows what's going to happen during this legislative session, although there have been public sentiments that at least out of the Senate, that they don't want a full-time legislature. I don't think the Assembly said anything one way or the other publicly, as opposed to some private comments by members of the Assembly. But who knows what develops? Of course, that's a multi-year situation. But if something develops that a resolution is passed for first passage this year, that's something we should look at, because we consider raises for the next 4 years, which would be after second passage. And then, although it's subject to a referendum, I don't think we much have to worry about what the results will that be, at least from all the polls that I've looked at. So we should get some information on that as well as to where we're going to go. And hypothetically, while we can't invade the Constitution, I'm just throwing this out, and I have not talked to anybody about it, certainly nobody in the legislature, can we set up a bifurcated system in which legislators announce that this is their full-time job and they earn salary X by a filing that they give to the respective secretaries of the Assembly and the Senate, and therefore earn X. If not filed, they earn Y, obviously a lesser number than X. I don't know anybody in the legislature is at all interested in that, but at least it's something we could explore and go on from there. As well, we'd have to also look at, if there is going to be something like a full-time legislature, we consider how things like per diems and that type of thing work. There's also how to handle the Lulus as they now exist. Is that something we want to get involved in or not? But to develop information on that. As I said, there's a lot of research, I think, that has to be done on a comparison basis to see where we are. And of course, we're going to have a range of public hearings in which we're going to get input from, I assume, around the state of people who have questions, and that in and by itself might produce even more for us to look at. So I think we have a full range of work to look at. I'm just sorry it's been 18 years, and unlike our judicial thing where there was a basis of the federal district court salary, whether you wanted it as it was, like I did, or a percentage of it, like Fran was talking about. It was working off the same number, one way or the other. We don't have that here, so we're sort of all in an exploratory area that no one in the state's ever been in before. So it's interesting.
Thank you. Fran?
The only thing I would say is I agree with Jim that there's a lot of research that has to be done to inform all of us as to how we're going to want to proceed. To one of the points Jim made regarding the legislative salaries, we don't know the parameters of the legislative job at this point, what it may be.
Correct.
Right, at the end of this legislative session. But the end of the legislative session is in April.
No, it won't. No, that's not true. The end of the legislative session is in June.
Is in June, rather.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. The budget will be at.
Some people always think it is April, and I totally agree with you. But that's not necessarily true either, unless the opinions of Attorney General have changed, and you might know that better than me. You could pass resolutions until August and still be counted as the first passage of a legislative constitutional change. And believe me, look, Governor Cuomo has been fantastic, which is why. No offense to him, he's taken a job at Stony Brook. He's been a great budget officer. He's got all those budgets down on time for the years he's been there. But my point is that I spent many years in the legislature in which we didn't do a budget till August, in which we were heavily considering things of meaty weight, and surely how the legislature acts is of meaty weight, way into August. I grant you this year it won't be after August, it's a campaign season. But until the constitutional date, which would be August something or other, I think that's still something under consideration.
Fine.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
The point I'm trying to make is that this is fluid, and if we had all of this comparison information, all of this research in front of us right now, we still wouldn't know what it was we were defining, right?
Yes.
We may know at some future date in this process. We may not know. We may have a good idea. We may know what's being discussed. The only point I'm making is that I could foresee a situation where we have a series of initial public hearings. We look at all the research that's gathered, and then we wait. And we wait and see where this process is heading, because what each of us may feel comfortable recommending as a part-time salary may be irrelevant if in fact the legislature decides to go full-time.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I just say one thing? One piece of research I forgot, and that is I have read surveys, usually done by newspapers, of X number of legislators who are, based on their filings, are full-time or not earning outside income. Could we also have somebody look at the 213 filings of the legislature as to the number with outside incomes? Because I see all different kinds of numbers. Again, my apologies for interrupting you, but that's right to your point as to how many, quite frankly, are full-time now, at least financially, as opposed to under the Constitution. Sorry again.
So I'm just saying that I think that the notion that we're going to have a couple of hearings down here, upstate, and then we're done, I think is unlikely, because I think that before we can reasonably come up, each of us, come up with our own notion of what would be the right thing to recommend, could change radically as a result of the actions of others. So that, to an extent, we have to let this play out, and I could see us having a series of meetings and then not doing anything for a couple of months and then coming back together again based on what happens during the session, and which may or may not be sufficient to inform us. Eventually, we're going to have to do something, but in an effort to do something that's as relevant as we possibly can to what the situation is, I just wouldn't rush this. The second thing we had discussed very briefly, and certainly no decision had been made, but we had discussions about the nature of the public hearings, since we were now going to be going upstate as well. And I see that Syracuse has dropped off of
No,
here.
it hasn't. We just don't have a date for it.
Oh, okay.
That we're going to talk
Right,
about.
okay.
Where the third place should be.
Okay.
Whether Syracuse or Rochester or Buffalo.
Okay.
Okay.
But my point being that we had talked about, so that we didn't have to do excessive traveling, and we have two distinctly different things that we have to deal with here, executive and legislative. And the executive is not as fluid as the legislative situation is. That we talked about maybe a format like we do a morning hearing on one and we do an afternoon hearing on the other, so that we don't have to keep going back. And I just put that out there. I thought that was a reasonable approach. It might make for some very long days, although my suspicion is the executive compensation public hearings will not be as active or as well participated in as the legislative will.
You're absolutely correct.
But I thought that was a good idea that I think you raised, Madam Chairwoman, and makes sense to me. So
Yeah, that we're going to get to a
Okay.
discussion of that's definitely on the agenda.
You know, other than that, I think that the only observation I'll make is that we will look at a lot of data, and we will make comparisons to other situations. You raise my good friend Bob Begna's new salary, and because SUNY, and by the way, the salaries and the administrative costs of SUNY and CUNY are now coming under much greater scrutiny. So I'm not sure that that's not going to change as a result of the politics of it and the ongoing discussions that are going to be had during this budget season. And the governor has certainly shined a spotlight on it. So I suspect that issue may be dealt with as well, having nothing to do with what we're doing. I would just state for the record that I think that if you start looking at things like executive compensation at not-for-profits and things like that, you run the risk of conflating two things that really aren't the same. That public sector salaries, and ours are incredibly low, so it's not that I'm suggesting that and I know firsthand what the horrors are of trying to manage a state agency where the commissioner is paid less than the four people who report to him or her. So that is something that we clearly have to take a look at. So I agree with Jim that looking at the 3 or 4 highest paid people in an agency is something we absolutely should do. I just throw out there that people who go to work in government, there is an expectation, should be on their part, and also I think on the part of the taxpayers, that public sector salaries are different and are generally lower than one is going to find even in the not-for-profit sector. So I think it's good to look at those things. I'm just not sure to the extent to which that kind of research should necessarily inform where we end up.
Thank you.
I've been both, and I've run not-for-profits, and I made far more running a not-for-profit, and I was worth every penny of it. Mm-hmm. And I had, large budgets and great responsibility. I had greater responsibility as a public servant, far greater, and dealt with far more money. But I had no expectation that I would be paid in government, even when I was paid to run a fairly major not-for-profit. So.
Okay, let's just move on and get opening comments, and then we can go back.
At some point, I would like to talk. I thought perhaps we were going to do staging before substance.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's cool. Not a complaint. But at some point, I've got some comments on that.
Absolutely.
I wasn't going to say anything except that, I can't sit next to Mr. Lack and have to say something.
Hey, we're in agreement, kids, so far. Just, let's not either of us say any more.
Do you want to make some comments, or?
No, I look forward to all the information. Something to consider. I understand public servants certainly should have an expectation of making less than not-for-profit, absolutely in the private sector. Is it worth, this is just to throw out there, though, comparing what our state pays to other states, or even
Yeah,
sort of
I
like we
think
did with
Yeah, I
the
think
judiciary.
that- Absolutely.
We will definitely do that.
Okay, great. That was my only comment.
That's great. It's on our list.
Nothing
Okay.
to add.
Okay.
Nothing to
Anything
add.
else? Back to you.
With the starting point that Jim provided, there are a couple of obvious places to look for some context information. With respect to legislative salary, since that's where we ended up, maybe we continue there for a second. One obvious thing is to find out what other states are doing.
Right.
And NCSL, National Conference of State Legislatures, typically maintains a database of exactly that, and it's kind of like a one phone call, and we can probably get everything about what other states are doing.
I have it already.
And he happens to have been a president of that organization, so maybe he could help us there.
It's already being sent to me, as of this morning.
With respect to legislatures more broadly,
President, they wouldn't.
we have a number of legislatures that are sort of local that are relevant too.
Right.
The New York City Council, the county legislatures of some of the bigger counties, Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester particularly, but perhaps Erie and Monroe as well. Their job descriptions are somewhat different from each other as well as from the state, but again, a point of reference. And since I mentioned the New York City Council as one of those legislatures, comparable to the county legislature in other parts of the state, perhaps some other big cities would be relevant as well. LA, San Francisco, Chicago, Miami, Houston
Absolutely.
would be kind of the obvious places to look there. And not unrelated, although certainly quite different, would be the Congress. That's a legislature that is long-term had higher salaries, but we should probably know what they are. With respect to the executive branch, I think that Jim is right that we should simply have the list and what the salaries are, because we're not sure exactly what the universe is without getting it written down someplace. But with respect to that, I agree that the senior civil servants should be included in the list. Even though they're not in our purview, it directly affects the workings of the agencies, and it is very much the case, as Fran has pointed out, that there are a number of agencies where those senior people make more, and that creates all sorts of difficulties. And it should be part of our calculation, even if not dispositive by itself. In that same regard, in thinking about the compensation, there are some oddities for some agencies where the statutory salary isn't the whole story. Oftentimes there is something that's in some sense off to the side but quite relevant. The obvious example with headlines related to it from decades ago is the health department with their research foundation. But that also speaks to what else is there. And it also speaks to the senior people question as well. The research foundation of the various agencies, particularly the ones in the health area, oftentimes play a role in what the salaries for the senior officials are. In mental health, there's a research foundation that's built into the salary of many of the doctors. And so it kind of colors what it is that you think about the agency looking like.
Are you thinking of pensions and?
No, not so much pensions as just plain compensation.
Okay.
They're outside the pension system.
In the case of the health department, the research foundation used to play a role that was like 50% of what the total compensation was.
I'm not aware of another agency.
I think mental health has the capacity for it. Whether they do it or not, I don't know.
And SUNY
certainly has that capacity.
and has been a real problem up and around Albany.
And it very much has been. But that gets back to this, what do we think about the scope of this being? If we're talking about research foundations, it instantly brings into question what kind of people are we talking about. Medical doctors are the obvious place where that happens a lot. For the SUNY faculty that are related to medical schools, That's a real common way of compensating, just like it is in the mental health world, where the New York Psychiatric Institute, the State Mental Health Department, Columbia, I think those faculty might get 3 salaries. They get a Columbia salary, and so having a sense of what that scope is like, even if we're not pinning it down and not being precise, to again give us context so we're not saying silly things when we're talking about this stuff. And so my point would be the agencies, the senior people, and other compensation related to the agency on state payroll, not people who are not on state payroll. With respect to SUNY and CUNY, I think the same question should apply. I'm going to know that from the get-go, I'm going to discount that in the same way that I'm not going to be terribly excited about exactly what do all the not-for-profits in the world pay as a point of comparison, because I agree with Fran that public sector is different. But we do have this anomaly. There are many people on public sector salary bases that also have other salaries, especially true in places where there are research foundations. So SUNY and CUNY, the medical centers in particular, I'd, again, like a sense of it, even if to discount it. In the Albany area, there's a SUNY faculty member who's doing very well for SUNY and very well for the state, and who's also getting paid an enormous amount, only a small fraction of which is his SUNY salary. And Calieros at Nanotech is my example there. But the same thing is true for medical doctors in the medical centers of the state university system. There are a number of people that are paid big bucks there too. I think the senior staff at SUNY and CUNY are relevant. Again, I don't think to the point of lockstep, but at least something to think about. The other big kind of anomaly that should be put into the research agenda, again, I want with a real grain of salt before we get going, before we fasten on it, but the bigger public authorities are relevant here as well. Certainly in terms of compensation, the ones we know are big are places like MTA and Port Authority, but we also have a variety of other statewide authorities that are relevant as well. The Dormitory Authority, UDC being big ones, where they do lots of financing. The Power Authority being another big one, where we do a lot of public benefit work. But some of the others that are pretty big in the finance world, things like EFC, which we also have authorized in law as a place where we do bonding on behalf of the state, I think that would be relevant as well. With respect to the chief executive, I agree that our statutory charge there is not clear, do something here because of the way in which the Constitution works. But I think it's relevant. I think it's important. I think it's important to keep in mind as we think about what compensation we're offering the senior officials in the state agencies. What is the boss makes? And I think while we are probably not charged with doing anything about it, I think perhaps that should be part of our thought process. So not only the executive of New York State, senior executive, but perhaps some of the other big states that we think of as sort of comparables, the New York comparables, or California, Illinois, much as I might not like it, probably Florida and Texas as well. But certainly that should be part of what we gather information on. The underlying thought that we all had in mind when we were talking about judges, even though we were using, at least I was using, the federal judges as a point of comparison, was keeping up with inflation and keeping the job attractive. So certainly having the basic information about inflation is part of what we should do. And insofar as we have the capacity to get some sense of what other senior executives are paid, I think it would be useful to have some sense of what at least a few of the big corporations in New York and a few of the big corporations that are not-for-profit in New York, not because I want to peg them, not because I want to use them, but because I do want to have that context. When we were, as a country, thinking about increasing compensation for the president, and we, doubled it, I think was the last time that was changed, everyone knew that that was silly. It wasn't anything other than the symbol of this is a senior person that we want to make sure is not suffering a hardship to take the job. That really implied that at some level public service ought not to be punishment. And I want to make sure that we have that concept available to us, if only to dismiss it in the form of here's what some senior executives based in New York are paid, both in the private sector, literally, and in the not-for-profit sector.
I think what we need to do is sort of prioritize what I think is going to...
On the priority, I would like to have the state legislatures elsewhere. I would like to have the county legislatures in New York. I'm being showed that we have some of that already. I would like to have the executives of New York agencies, the very top, the ones that we're talking about, and the senior people in those same agencies, the ones that we're aware we have management problems related to the number 2 and 3 and 4 person getting paid more than number 1.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. It's the priorities of what we need to be looking at, and then we can sort of come up.
And so those to me are the priorities. I think the next layer is the ancillary state, and that's the SUNY and CUNY executives, the presidents, the senior class of the executives. So the vice presidents would be the way I kind of summarize that. And when I say president, I use the term loosely because some places they're called president, some places they're called chancellor, but the senior executive. And the public authorities, I would like the top ones so that we know what we're talking about. In some sense, that's the same comment as about the senior managers of an agency getting paid more than the head of the agency. We have public authorities in the state that are paid way more than the senior executives of the state.
Yeah, because they haven't been subject to the same statutory
That's
limitations.
right.
And
Exactly. And again, I don't know that that's lockstep. Just now that we have the data, this is what we have to think. But I think we have to have the information, or we can't think clearly. And then I would stop. All the rest are, to me, secondary. But it would be nice if we could have it.
Okay, so we'll create a agenda of research, giving priorities to certain things. So I think we have sort of, we haven't finished it. When people want to make other comments to the data and research requests, I'd like to go back to the hearing dates.
Yes.
I think we have agreement, and all of the commissioners at the moment can make 2 of the hearing dates that we had in mind. It would be March 10th in New York City, and March 23rd in Albany. And if you'd like, we could take Fran's suggestion, especially in Albany, and have the morning as a legislative, or the afternoon as executive, or vice versa. But I think probably makes more sense to have people have slots that we're taking one or the other, in the morning and the afternoon.
With respect to the Albany hearing and the notion of bifurcating, I guess I would suggest that we do the executive in the morning and legislative in the afternoon,
No problem.
because we don't want to have the scheduling problem that a crowd might create.
Okay.
With respect to the Albany hearing itself, I know from my work life and from reading the newspapers that it's budget season in Albany, and when budget season hits, there are literally no spaces at all available during that season for anybody
I have a
to be
guest
in
room
the
that will
LOP
give up
or the Capitol.
at a great price to anyone.
I'm sorry, what?
I have a guest room that that I can offer.
I'm not worried about staying overnight.
That I can offer if
I'm
for
worried
a
about,
really,
worried
really
about
good
parking the
price.
car.
Yeah,
Right,
well,
right.
and more to the point, you can't get a space in those buildings during those weeks because they're booked already
Well,
for budget hearings.
well, I think we'll make an effort right now to try to lock in some building, maybe the Albany Law School or some of the other.
Maybe we can borrow a Albany court building.
Right.
Where the Court of Claims and the second department is, would be one place.
Court of Appeals would be a lovely place.
I specifically did not mention that because that is not something OCA is going to be at all in favor of, and I totally understand and agree. But the Justice Building across the street from the Capitol, where the third department and Court of Claims is certainly a space that we could,
Right. So
if the courts would care to donate.
Well, but to the point about how hard it is to even just get a place to park if you are that close to the Capitol this time of year, you may want to think about going someplace a little bit else. If you're talking about hotels and parking, if you get to the Wolf Road side of Albany, you're not going to have those problems. I don't know where we would meet.
Well,
but
does it make sense to have the hearing a little later in Albany then?
That would certainly obviate the crunch related to
When
budget.
would that be?
Specifically after April 1st.
Does that make some sense?
Well,
Yeah.
one assumes an on-time budget, and, yeah.
Well,
Now I'm going
we
to,
can certainly move the state, but I think people have
I'm away
some problem.
I'm away the first 2 weeks in April. It was scheduled long before I was ever
Yeah,
appointed
no,
to
I
this.
understand that. Well, let's just leave it where it is at the moment with, hopefully we will be able to get a space and people.
And I think it's a little hard not to have it.
And we're all staying in.
To have it, you got to have a hearing in a public building. I mean, we're not going
Yeah.
to rent space from a
Right.
hotel.
well, we could go to the campus somewhere, but.
Yeah. But we may.
I'm sure some yes.
You could go to the Harriman campus.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm sure there would be
Absolutely.
an appropriate space there, but
And we all may be.
And
lots of parking.
Well, we might also be criticized for picking an out-of-the-way place and all, but I'm just opening it up as opposed
Seeing
to...
as how there's no real public transportation other than the bus system, I don't really think for people who are going to be coming to testify in
Fair
Albany,
enough.
it matters. They're all
Okay.
coming by car anyway. In fact, they might be happier coming to the campus.
Well, all of us
rather
might be
than-
happier since we no longer have, any of us have reserved parking places.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
Can we talk about a third meeting, which will likely be in April, and likely be, I'm sorry.
Before we settle on a third, let me also offer these two suggestions. I think an upstate hearing is a really good idea, but I also think considering an outer borough location and a Long Island location would be a good idea as well.
Okay, well, you're talking about a fourth hearing then?
Well, I think the notion of being available for the public to comment, you got to go where the people are, and that's where people are. And certainly in the city, the notion that everything happens in Manhattan is a point of irritation. And on the island, the same thing is almost as clearly true.
Well, let's get
I'm
back.
just going to sit here and smile, whatever you want, Robin.
Let's get back to that question. But if we are going to do on the third one upstate, there are, it seems to me, three possibilities: Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo. Unless anyone has another thought of those three, do people have thoughts of where they think this hearing should be?
I would argue that Syracuse is sort of more widely available as an upstate location than either Rochester or Buffalo, not because there are more people there, but because if you are anywhere in upstate New York,
You can drive.
you're going to drive, and Buffalo is at the far end. Rochester a little less so. Syracuse a lot less so for a big chunk of the state. But I think that those are still the three conspicuous upstate options.
I agree, where the three of us live, getting to Syracuse is a lot easier than...
So just to move the conversation, if we chose Syracuse, is there anybody that would object to Syracuse as the third place? So let's say Syracuse, and we will reach out to everyone separately as to timing so that we can hopefully, have everyone available. So it will be sometime after April 15th. When are you?
April 15th.
Okay, so
Monday, April 18th, actually.
okay,
Yeah.
so it'll be sometime after April
Thank you.
18th, but we'll reach out to everybody and to get a date that works for everyone. So then the question becomes, I think we need a meeting in New York City. So do people think there should be a fourth hearing? I assume what you're saying is someplace in Nassau or Suffolk, Roman?
Yes, and there are government buildings that work pretty well. The government center in Hauppauge is such a place.
That makes it really hard for me, but okay.
No, it's a pain.
Where my office was for 24 years,
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Exactly.
I think I know where it is.
The outer boroughs, the two obvious places are Brooklyn Borough Hall and Queensborough Hall.
Well,
Well,
I think
and-
if you're in Manhattan or Brooklyn, it hardly matters.
Well, Sheila, I think part of the way we can also measure that is what happens at the first
Right.
hearings.
Yeah.
I was going to say,
Wait and see who and what shows up.
I think that's
And would comment, and then I'll make up. We could storm the gates at Syracuse, and you might have to say we got to go to Rochester or Buffalo as well. I mean, who knows?
All right, so let's at the moment leave it at 3, and then after we have at least the first two experiences, we can figure if we need a fourth and or fifth.
Taking the tomato stains off our
Yeah.
shirts and
Yeah. Well, I don't think they're going to throw tomatoes at us, right? Who knows? So that would take care of the public hearings. I think we have an agenda for the data and research issues in some sort of priority. Are there any other issues that we need to discuss? And then, of course, we'll set up a bunch of hearings for us to make decisions. And as Fran said, maybe there'll be a hiatus between the hearings themselves. At that point, we may need additional information and data. So I think we'll just keep the agenda open as to meeting dates after that instead of setting them down now. Does that make some sense?
That makes sense.
Yep. Okay, any other issues that we need to discuss before we see each other on March 10th? Probably in this building, but we'll see what places we get. We didn't want to get a place until we lock down these dates. And we'll try to, this week, lock down the date for Syracuse so that we can post all the dates together. Does that make some sense, also? Okay. Any other business? We stand adjourned until March 10th. Thank you all.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Discussions. How can I sit there?